we sit here long enough, maybe other people.
Good evening, everyone. I'm going to call to order the September 26th meeting of the Santa Monica City Council, and Mr. Gupta could lead us in the pledge. We like to introduce our rookies with this time-honored tradition. Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Well done and welcome. I'm sure there'll be more official stuff at the moment and later this evening, but welcome to your first meeting of the Santa Monica City Council. And if the clerk could call the roll, please.
Councilmember McCune.
Here.
Councilmember Vasquez.
Present.
Councilmember Hemmerich.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Davis.
Here.
Councilmember O'Day. Present. And Mayor Winter.
Here. And if the clerk could now call the closed session items, please.
You have closed session. You have several closed sessions. Existing litigations, which include Armstrong versus the City of Santa Monica, the City of Santa Monica versus the United States. You have one anticipated litigation. You have another existing litigation, which is Karen Thompson versus Kelly Sue Park. Yeah. And then you have another one, Airbnb Inc. and HomeAway.com Inc. versus the City of Santa Monica. And then you have another potential litigation, and you have no request to speak.
Very good. And look over the city attorney for an anticipated return to open session. You'll want to use your microphone.
6:30.
6:30. Okay, we will be back here for the public part of our meeting at 6:30.
I've been giving her lessons.
All right, good evening, everyone. We are out from closed session, pretty much right on time, and so if we could have a report out from the city attorney on the items we considered during our closed session.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. During closed session, item 1F was not discussed. The other items were discussed. The only reportable action is with respect to item 1A. It's existing litigation, Armstrong versus City of Santa Monica. Ms. Armstrong filed civil litigation after tripping and falling on the sidewalk on the 1800 block of Wilshire Boulevard, resulting in injuries. The city attorney's office is recommending settlement in the amount of $160,000.
Move settlement.
Second.
All right, we have a motion by David, seconded by O'Day for the settlement. It was $160,000, is that correct?
That's correct.
And can we have a roll call vote, please?
Councilmember O'Connor?
Yes.
Councilmember O'Day?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Davis?
Yes.
Councilmember Himmelrich?
Yes.
Councilmember Vasquez?
Yes.
Councilmember Keown?
Yes.
And Mayor Winter.
Yes, so that passes unanimously, 7-0, and that concludes the report out from closed session. We'll go on to item 2A, if the clerk could call that, and I'm going to turn this all over to you.
Item 2A is the Los Angeles County Clerk presentation of Voting Systems Assessment Project, also known as VSAP. Mayor and City Council, in an effort to promote today National Voter Registration Day, we thought this would be a perfect opportunity to invite the Los Angeles County Registrar Recorder's Office to come out and present the county's Voting Systems Assessment Project for the upcoming 2018 and 2020 elections. Presenting tonight is our Dean Logan. He's a Registrar Recorder for Los Angeles County. Dean, I'm turning it over to you.
Good evening. Thank you. It's my honor to be here. Thank you, Mayor and Council members. I first want to thank Denise and her staff for their warm welcome and their partnership with us today on National Voter Registration Day. It's a perfect day to come and present to you information on where we're headed in Los Angeles County in terms of voting. You had a great event out here in the City Hall today, and we had the opportunity to have prototypes of our new voting equipment here for citizens to take a look at. So we look forward to more opportunities to do that. What I wanted to do briefly tonight is just go through a little bit of history on the project that we've undertaken in LA County to modernize the voting experience in Los Angeles County, and to talk about how we're going to begin implementing that in the 2018 election cycle, and then it'll be fully implemented in 2020. So, always have to do the obligatory demographic data for Los Angeles County. Obviously, we're a very large jurisdiction covering over 4,100 square miles. Total population estimated at about 10.1 million. 6.2 million of those eligible to be registered to vote. Currently, we have 5.2 million registered voters. Thus, the emphasis on National Voter Registration Day today. We have 1 million plus eligible citizens that are yet to be registered, and we want to engage them in the process. Interesting statistic on that, that does make us the largest local election jurisdiction in the country, which has its challenges. We actually have more registered voters here in Los Angeles County than 42 of the 50 states have statewide. So while we operate as a local government function, our size compares to many states in the country. Likewise, as you well know, we're a very diverse, arguably the most diverse electoral jurisdiction in the United States, from really every aspect of diversity that you can think of. So ethnic diversity, language preference diversity, economic diversity. Age demographics is another thing we like to emphasize right now. Interesting statistic, again, for National Voter Registration Day, that population between the ages of 18 and 30 are actually the plurality of the voters in Los Angeles County, yet they are the lowest represented in those who turn out in the elections. So they actually have the biggest opportunity to have the biggest impact in our elections, but currently are not as engaged. So that's an area that we continue to work on. So a little bit of background. LA County, the voting system that we currently operate in Los Angeles County, which is referred to as IncaVote Plus, from a voter experience standpoint, from the perspective of a voter walking into a polling place, this has been the way we vote in Los Angeles County since punch card voting was first rolled out in 1968. So we're talking about if you're not a native of Los Angeles County and have voted anywhere else, it's not a very familiar system. It's an antiquated system. It's older technology. It's certainly been updated since 1968 on the back end, where we tabulate the votes and how we process that, and we've converted from a punch card to a ink-based system. But the actual experience for the voter is still much the same as it was when it was first introduced in 1968. And it lacks the flexibility and adaptability to address accessibility issues, language access, and a number of things that more modern systems and more modern experiences that our citizens embark on have. So we knew and have known for quite some time that we were at the end of the life cycle of this voting system, and there was a need to modernize. Given our size and diversity, however, we did a market assessment, and there was no commercially available voting system that really could meet the needs of Los Angeles County. Most elections jurisdictions across the country are small and mid-sized jurisdictions. Again, we compare by size to most states, and there really wasn't a solution out there for us. Likewise, as we were going through this process, we were also in a period of regulatory instability, both at the state level, where the commercial voting systems that were in use in California were decertified, and many counties went back to their older voting systems. And then even at the federal level, the United States Elections Assistance Commission was pretty much defunct. There weren't active commissioners on that board, and there weren't appointees being considered by the U.S. Senate. That's changed some now. There are 3 members of that board, so we are starting to see some change. But that created a situation where we recognized that in Los Angeles County, we could not wait for the market environment or the regulatory environment to stabilize in order for us to move forward. And that's why we embarked on this project, which is we stepped back and said, why don't we look at this from a holistic standpoint and look at this through the eyes of a voter? If we're going to invest public funds into a new voting system that may last us another 30 years like the current one, how do we do that in a way that instills the significance of the vote, instills confidence that voters' ballots are being cast and counted as they intended them to be, and that would meet the needs of a growing and changing population, recognizing that things change so quickly. So we set out on this project to design a new voting experience, and we focused on the word experience because we didn't want to approach this solely as a technology or a system project. We really wanted to look at it from the experience of the voter. And some of the fundamental goals of that project were to, at the end of the day, to have a publicly owned voting system, not to be reliant on a single commercial vendor or proprietary software or hardware, but for this to be a truly publicly owned system. We wanted to do this in a way that would spur innovation in the voting systems market, so the limitation that we have in the market, that maybe we could break into that, get some more players into that, and that would help other jurisdictions as they move forward. We wanted to encourage a regulatory environment that actually allows for the development and certification of a publicly owned system, and establish that model as a model for voting system development and implementation across the country. And in that regard, we wanted to make sure that whatever work we did, because of the capacity that we have in Los Angeles County, that we would make that available in a very transparent manner to other jurisdictions, both in California and throughout the country, if they wanted to follow suit. So we did this using a human-centered design process. We spent the first couple of years of this project just doing research, going out and talking to voters, learning what did they like about their current voting experience, what did they find lacking in their current voting experience. We talked to voters who have voted their entire adult life. We talked to registered voters who are registered but never vote. We talked to the emerging electorate, high school and college students who represent the voters of the future. And we talked to people who are eligible but not registered and asked, what is it about the voting experience that detracts you from participation? So in total, we've talked to over 3,800 voters, poll workers, and election administrators through surveys, focus groups, and actual hands-on demonstrations of prototypes in this process. Couple of examples to share with you. These are the voices of the voters that really helped us in the design of this. You see in the photo up there, Mike, who's a U.S. veteran who talked to us about coming back after serving overseas during a time of war, and the experience of post-traumatic stress disorder, and how being in a crowded place, public place, and feeling the pressure of marking a ballot can be very intimidating for him. So he talked about the environment of a polling place and what could be different about that to make that less stressful for him. Ernie, who you see in the photo, is a retired postmaster who was very active in civic life his whole adult life and professional career, but lost his vision late in life and found that he was unable to cast a secret or private ballot without the assistance of someone else, so he stopped participating in the process. And Sue, who's a first-generation American who came here with her parents. They instilled the value of voting, but she worries about the pace of life and people who have families and whether they have the ability to get to polling places on a specific day and a specific time period to cast their ballots. So these are just some of the types of voices that we heard in our process, which led to what we're excited to introduce is the new voter experience in Los Angeles County that we will begin to introduce in 2018. And there are a number of components to this, some that are familiar, some that are new. Includes a modern tally system, which I know for you will be important so that we can get you results on election night and you can go to bed feeling like you know the outcome of the election. An interactive sample ballot that I'll talk about in a moment. A ballot marking device, which is the picture that you see on in the bottom of the slide. This looks very much like a touchscreen direct recording electronic voting equipment, but it's actually very different. It's a marking device. I'll go into that in a little bit later. Couple fundamental elements of this new voter experience is that it really enhances early voting and vote center. So it moves us to a place where voters can go to any vote center to cast their ballot. And that involves the use of electronic poll books so that we can be sure that if you're a voter, Santa Monica voter, but you are in Torrance and you happen to want to go into a vote center in Torrance and cast your ballot, that we can get you a Santa Monica ballot and you would be able to cast your ballot at that location. And it involves a new vote by mail ballot experience as well. The whole picture of this is premised on a philosophy of meeting voters where they are. Instead of voters having to come and find the voting experience, it's to put it out in the community where voters are already interacting. So the idea here is that voters can vote at any of those vote centers over a 10-day period leading up to election. Each of those vote centers would have fully accessible voting equipment at them. And it would start 10 days before the election. We would actually increase the number of locations during the final 4 days of the election. Full accessibility at all those locations. So again, contrast between today's experience where you have one place to vote on one piece of equipment on one day between the hours of 7 a.m. and 8 p.m. to a 10-day period where you can actually do that when you're out engaging in other activity that you do on a regular basis. So here are the pieces of it. The ballot marking device, again, looks very much like an electronic voting equipment that became controversial after the 2008 election. But what this is actually, it is simply what it says, a ballot marking device. So it uses a touchscreen interface. It provides accessibility features. It provides options for voters to hear or see the ballot in the language of their choice. But ultimately what this does is it produces a human-readable paper ballot that becomes the permanent ballot of record. And that's what comes back to our office to be tabulated on election night. This gives you a quick kind of visual of how this would work. The voter would go in, mark their choices. They would insert a blank ballot into the device. Their particular ballot, again, any ballot style from throughout the county could be presented here. Make their selections. They can change their mind, go back and forth. I know, catchy little tune here. Once the voter's done marking their ballot, then they get a summary screen that shows them all of their selections. At that point, they still have the option to go back and change their mind, so they are in full control of that. Once they're ready for their ballot to be completed, it's going to print out on the right side, and you see it's a human-readable ballot that shows all their choices. They actually can then review it one more time. Once they know that the marks on the ballot match their choices, then they hit the cast ballot button and it goes into an integrated ballot box in the back of the device. Some key elements of this are full accessibility. This was actually designed so that a voter who doesn't have the ability to physically touch their ballot could actually complete the voting experience without the assistance of another individual, which is an issue that we have wrestled with here in LA County and throughout the country for quite some time. So we're very proud of that particular element of it. Again, it allows the voter to choose what language they want the ballot to be presented in. If they want to toggle between languages, one of the things we learned from voters is that they may be comfortable with the candidate contest presented in English, but the ballot measures, which I would argue are sometimes hard to comprehend for those of us whose native language is English, they may wish to toggle to a different language for that purpose. They may also have the option of listening to it audibly in one language and seeing it in another language. So it's fully customizable to the voters' choices. The interactive sample ballot is an element that we're very excited about. This moves us to kind of be consistent with the way people interact with their personal devices. This is fully optional. It's not required of any voter, but this will allow us to issue the sample ballot. Much like you're used to the paper sample ballot that you get in the mail, we now will be able to provide that to you electronically. In advance of the election, you can interact with that, pre-mark your choices, much like we encourage you to mark in pencil and bring your sample ballot with you, but you could bring it in an electronic form, scan it into the device, and actually it will pre-populate your choices, and all you have to do is confirm those choices and then cast your ballot. So this is really moving towards a recognition of the way that people are so reliant on their personal devices. So it operates much the way a electronic boarding pass operates in air travel right now. Our vote by mail ballots, instead of the guide and filling in the bubbles where you have to look for what number corresponds with which candidate and move it onto the ballot, we now will have a full face optical scan ballot where the names of the candidates and the measures are right there on the ballot, and the voters will mark their choice and mail those back to us. So project timeline, we intend to roll this out beginning in 2018. We plan to have vote centers during the early voting period in 2018. We also plan to introduce the new vote by mail ballots in 2018. And then the idea is by 2020 to go to the full implementation where we would be completely functioning with the vote centers and the new equipment. Our next steps, we just issued an RFP for the manufacturing of this system. Again, the beauty of this is we own the intellectual property, so the design specs of the equipment, the software, all of that is owned publicly by Los Angeles County, so we can competitively bid that. If we have to go out and get more equipment in the future, we can then go out. Again, we're not in a long-term relationship with one single commercial vendor, and the source code for all of the software associated with this will be developed in an open source platform that again belongs to the county, not to a proprietary source. Implementation strategy. What we're doing now, as we move into the manufacturing of the equipment, we're also beginning the process of going out to identify where these vote centers will be located. And we're going out into the community to do that as well. We want these vote centers to be places, again, that are visible and familiar to the voters, so that they know from election to election that they can go to a place that they're comfortable with and that is convenient for them. So whether that's someplace that's close to the daycare where you drop off your children, close to where you work, or close to where you do your grocery shopping, we want to make voting accessible that way. We plan to also have mobile and pop-up locations, so if we know the weekend before the election that there's going to be a large farmers market that attracts a lot of people, we want to go down just like a food truck and set up a vote center, and so that voters see that we're there, and if they're ready to come in and mark their ballot, they can do that. So we're very excited about that. We recognize that while that's designed with the voters in mind, it's a pretty big change in the way people vote. So we're going to have to do a lot of outreach and education, a lot of partnerships in the community to both demonstrate the voting equipment, but also to get input on where to locate these vote centers. Public facilities obviously will be places that we are very interested in, libraries, community centers, places like that. So we will be working with our partners in the city clerks and other stakeholders over the next 6 months to a year to do that siting process to make sure that we pick the right locations. So next I'm going to just show you another quick video just to show you how excited we are about this, and then leave information for you and for the people watching on how you can continue to follow the project, and then I'd be happy to take any questions.
To meet the evolving needs of our nearly 5 million voters, Los Angeles County is challenging traditional ideas about voting systems. The days of inking your ballot are rapidly coming to an end. In the next few years, innovations and new technology will revolutionize the way you vote. Let's take a look at some of the changes you'll see. You know how voting includes paper sample ballots for your review? Get ready for a sample ballot that is interactive and accessible, providing a flexible and trustworthy voting method. This interactive ballot will let you mark it, generate a QR code for scanning and uploading, and review your selections at a vote center on a modern, sleek touchscreen with customizable viewing options for your preferred language, text size, and contrast. Voting will be simple, efficient, and cost-effective. Using input from the voting public and engaging expert designers, Los Angeles County's voting system has been reimagined to use a high-tech ballot marking device that still produces a paper ballot for accountability and accuracy. The best part? Voters will be able to vote anywhere in the county as early as 10 days prior to the election. Are you excited yet? By pioneering a voter-centered approach to design, Los Angeles County's new voting system will maximize technology to make it easier to cast your vote and enrich your voting experience for today and tomorrow.
And we do have a website for the project, which contains all of the research, the videos, and the material that we presented tonight, and an email. We encourage continual input from the electorate as well as from the elected officials that we serve here in the county, and we look forward to a modernized and voter-centered voting experience starting in 2018 and 2020.
Thank you very much, Mr. Logan. I thought that was fascinating. I suspect that, there's 7 of us up here on the dais that are really interested in voting more than the average member of the public. But let's see if any of my colleagues have any questions. Councilmember McEwen.
Mr. Logan, thank you. And you covered a lot of ground. I've been engaged on this at the statewide level since the Secretary of State was Kevin Shelley. So that's been, 15, 17
right.
years. And you mentioned the 2 key points, which are open source software and a paper ballot.
Right.
But there is that moment when the software creates the ballot. It looked as if the ballot, although it did have human verifiable names to show who or what you voted for, it also printed a QR code on the ballot.
Right.
That, I assume, is what the machines in Norwalk will be reading.
That's correct. The QR code and the purpose for that is for rapid tabulation. That QR code can be read by any generic QR code reader, so it can be audited, and we would conduct a risk limiting audit after the election.
So I have a QR code reader on my iPhone because I'm that kind of guy.
Yep.
So after I voted, I could scan that code and I could verify
Absolutely.
that I voted for Kevin McKeown.
Correct.
That'll be good. My other question is, what are the capabilities and the flexibilities of this system compared to what we have? For instance, suppose a community chose to go to ranked choice voting. Can you handle that?
We can, and I anticipated that question. The beauty of this, because it is open source and because we own the development rights to it as a public entity, is that we can make those modifications. And that's really important to us starting at the beginning of this. We wanted to do this in an agile development model so that as laws changed, as voter behavior changes, and as technology changes, we didn't want to have to scrap the system and start over again. So that's a long way of answering your question, that we did not design, so we don't currently have the software built for ranked choice voting or instant runoff voting into the system because that's not currently a requirement in LA County. If and when a jurisdiction in LA County passes that, then this does have the ability to adapt to that change.
Would the jurisdiction have to pay to have the software developed, or would that be something the county would do?
I think it would depend on how that becomes law. So if it was for a particular city, we probably would have to have some discussion about that because we couldn't apportion out that software development to the other jurisdictions.
And excuse this excursion into the weeds, but there are different ways of doing ranked choice.
Exactly.
So would you be able to accommodate Carteret for one community and some other method of ranked choice vote counting for another?
We would, because what's presented to the voter on the screen is the ballot style for their particular jurisdiction. So as long as we build that into the ballot style and we know which part of the ballot is the alternate voting method, we would be able to do that.
So other than the inherent discomfort with change that we know is the human condition, are there any downsides to making this transition?
I don't think there are downsides to making the transition. I think the transition is necessary. I think what we know is that the status quo is not working. We need to have a more engaging voting process. We know that this alone is not going to change voter participation because it's more intrinsic than that. I mean, we can't control what's on the ballot, who's on the ballot, and why people choose to engage. We know from a historical perspective that when voters believe that their vote makes a difference, and they overcome time, place, and equipment. But what we can do is make sure that that voting experience measures up to that significance. So I think the challenge before us is, while I think this is ultimately a far better voting experience, it's how do we get the word out to 5.2 million people that this is now how it's going to work, so that they know what to expect and they're comfortable with it and that they trust it.
We in Santa Monica are proud to be a high turnout community, and I hope we will be able to work with you to make sure that continues to be the case.
We look forward to it.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Councilmember Vasquez.
Kind of following the same lines in terms of voter participation. I understand, I guess in 2018, and maybe the deadline is 2020, a lot of these smaller municipalities and school districts are now going to have to move into November elections and be tied into the gubernatorial and the presidential.
Right.
So, and actually that should be a huge savings for you folks, because right now you do all these little independent elections now that are off years and off months, basically.
Right. Well, many of those cities run their own elections, but
Exactly.
Yes, there should be some savings in that consolidation. Absolutely.
So when is the drop date 2020 for that?
So that is the state law that requires that consolidation gives the jurisdictions, they have to adopt a plan by 2018, and then that plan has to be in effect by 2022. So we already have a number of cities and school districts and local districts that have already adopted plans and are going in 2018, many of them. Others so for instance, the city of Los Angeles comes on board in 2020, and then we'll have the final group that comes on board in 2022.
And along those same lines, you have this other, I guess, legislation that's moving some of these folks, I guess the ones, especially cities that are over 100,000 to move into districts. And in some of those areas in the county, for example, I know like in Centinela Valley, they have numbered seats in districts, but they still run at large.
Right.
Are they going to be forced to move into actual districts, or are they going to be able to continue?
There's nothing in the current law that requires them to change to districts or to switch from at large. Most of the cities that have made those changes, it's been as a result of claims filed under the California Voting Rights Act about the distribution of the population. So the California Voting Rights Act is still intact. I think the theory, and we'll see how it plays out, I think the theory is that by consolidating on the even year, you're going to see increased participation, right, which will offset the concerns that have been raised about districts versus at large.
But some of those are numbered seats, but they run at large.
Right. So they would still be separate elections. So you would be electing people individually rather than vote for three. You would elect three different offices, but every voter would get to vote on every one of those contests.
Thank you.
Councilmember Hemmerich.
Hi, and thanks for that. That was great. So my question is about confidentiality of voting. So if you have a QR code and you don't have a QR scanner, are you able to see what you put on your ballot?
Yes, so the ballot prints out in a human readable form, and it's actually what we call a selections only ballot. So you'll actually see the names of the candidates you voted for, or yes and no on the measures, before that ballot goes into the ballot box.
But so you could take a picture of it with your phone, but for people who aren't really adept about that, will people be able to print out a copy for themselves?
No, you can't print out a copy to take with you because it's the official ballot. Your point about photography is an interesting, that's a new issue. There's actually a new law that actually prior to last year, ballot selfies were not legal in California. They are now legal in California. And I think the concern there from a policy standpoint is does that lead to vote buying where you're taking your ballot and proving to somebody that you voted a certain way and that type of thing. So I think there's still concerns about that. to be worked out.
Taking a picture of yourself with your ballot behind.
Correct.
Yeah, right. With respect to this proliferation now of these post office boxes, are we doing anything about making sure that people actually aren't using post office boxes to register rather than their regular address under the appropriate circumstances?
Yes, you are required to provide a residential address. So if we receive a voter registration form that only lists the post office box, we have to get either a physical address or a physical location so that we can make sure that they have the right ballot style.
I understand what you're saying, but what I'm talking about is the post office boxes that make it look as if you have an actual address.
Yes, and that has been an issue. We do try to, there is no registry of those places. So when we're notified of those addresses, we do tag those in our system to check for them. But it is an issue. It is an issue because a lot of those, as you say, list a street address.
Well, it appears it doesn't. They appear to be a street address, but they aren't really.
Exactly.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember O'Connor.
Well, I was just going to say I'm really thrilled about the early voting because I loved it when you had it for those years, and I voted my Santa Monica ballot in Pasadena, Culver City, and West Los Angeles, and I think Redondo Beach. So I think that's great because
Not all in the same election.
No, right. Multiple, different places. I was in different places in different elections, different years, and the convenience of that was fabulous. Being able to not be tied to a single day,
right.
Not being worried about. Okay, I got in the mail a few days ago. Where did I put it? All of those things. It's like if you are out and about and you are near one of those locations, you can go in and you can vote your hometown ballot with all the state and federal and your local items on it. So I think this is great that it's coming back.
Great, thank you.
Well, thank you very much for taking your time to come down and see this evening. We really appreciate it. It was very informative, as I noted, and we look forward to seeing all this new technology coming up in the future.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much. All right, and I'm going to throw the ball back at the clerk again for you have your usual customary question to ask of all of us.
Yes, does anyone have anything to report on travel since the last meeting?
Councilmember O'Connor.
Yes, last week I went to San Francisco to participate in the California Transit Association's board meeting. At the meeting, under discussion was the ongoing transportation electrification issues dealing with the California Air Resources Board and how to help transit agencies move forward in electrification as well as getting funding to help support that. Also discussed where, as many of you know, the SB1 was passed a couple of months ago, the Transportation Funding Bill, which for the first time in 40 years has really provides significant new funding sources dedicated and ongoing revenues for transit agencies throughout the state. Took probably 4 years to get there of work and advocacy, of which the California Transit Association and its member transit agencies participated in and worked hard on. And as many of you know, there's now a threat to that legislation and being put on referendum. So there'll be ongoing discussions about that. Also discussed was the California cap and trade funding and how that cap and trade funding working to get those funds for transit uses dedicated, including the low carbon transit operations program. And we also discussed the beginnings of advocacy for legislation for the next year at the state and federal that would support transportation and transit uses.
Thank you. Councilmember Vasquez.
Yes, I went up to Sacramento to represent us for the California League of Cities and attended, and actually Pam you were there, but we actually didn't cross our paths, but I heard people that ran across you, some of our colleagues. And anyway, there was several good workshops I think that were going on, mostly around legislation here in Sacramento. And nothing, I don't think that was, at least to me, earth-shaking. But one of the things I think it was really pretty good to see is it seems to be a lot of young new electeds in a lot of these little municipalities that are getting elected. And so I found myself spending a lot of time being a mentor to some of these youngsters. And many of them that came out of the school boards now are on city councils and are participating in the League of Cities. So it's kind of refreshing to see some new young blood and some good energy. And many of them were actually able to be the actual delegates, so they were really excited to be able to vote for the first time. So looking forward to future meetings with them. And just on a side note real quick, the National League of Cities is actually going to be here, not this year, but the following year in Los Angeles, 2018, right? So just keep that in mind.
Councilmember McEwen.
Well, for the last year and a half, we in Santa Monica, again, at long last, have become a rail city. So I just got back Friday from the National Rail Evolution Conference in Denver. Interestingly, compared to last year's meeting, there was much more social equity focus this time. Maybe because of what's happened in Washington and the fact that we in cities now know we're on our own. Most of the workshops and the tours I was a participant in focused on producing truly affordable, deed-restricted housing near transit lines, which we've been doing, and how to avoid gentrification and displacement of existing residents, which is a challenge everybody faces when new transit lines come in. There are also presentations on autonomous vehicles, what they're going to mean for future parking needs and traffic challenges. And I did some Vision Zero work on biking and walking safety.
Thank you. And back to Councilmember O'Connor.
Yeah, because I forgot, because a lot has happened to me since that, the League of California Cities. So I was up in Sacramento also, but during that time, besides attending some League of California Cities participation, I was also there for the Local Government Commission board meeting. I'm chair of the Local Government Commission. We had one of the regular board meetings and talked about issues mostly related to, besides the organizational issues related to climate change, cap and trade funding, and moving forward. And next year in 2018, besides the National League of Cities being in Los Angeles, the state of California is going to be having a major climate change conference. So again, working and leading up to that and what cities do in terms of reducing greenhouse gas emissions and climate efforts.
All right, that covers that. Before we jump into the consent calendar, I'm going to see if I can get the city manager's attention. It seems to me he has a new face sitting to his left that he might like to briefly introduce to the members of the public.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and members of the council, as well as members of the community. We recently filled the vacant job of deputy city manager and have refocused the deputy city manager role to include the title Director of Policy. So the first person to hold the new title is Anuj Gupta. Anuj comes to us from the city of Los Angeles, where he was special counsel on immigration, and prior to that was Deputy Chief of Staff to Mayor Garcetti. He spent 3 years in the Obama White House, essentially as the traffic cop for all foreign and domestic policy memos and matters that came before the president. And he is an attorney and a long-time Southern Californian and a resident of Santa Monica along with his wife and son. So if you don't mind, I'd like to give him an opportunity to say hello.
Absolutely. You know, teach him how to use the microphone while you're at it. There he goes. Oh, look at that. All right.
First try.
Natural, yeah.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Rick and council members. I am absolutely delighted to be joining the city of Santa Monica. As Rick said, this is not just now my place of work, but it has been my hometown and my family's hometown for the last 3.5 years or so. And the Southern California region, the LA area, is my native, the place where I was born and raised. So I've had a lot of exciting opportunities professionally in DC, in Los Angeles with Mayor Garcetti, but I couldn't be more thrilled to now literally be coming home and working on the issues that will shape the future of this community, which also happens to be the community in which both my wife and I, but probably most importantly, our son will grow up. And I'm very mindful of that as I take on this new role. I'm excited to be working with all of you, with Rick, and with all the fine department heads and the 2,300 employees of the city, and above all with the residents and the stakeholders, the community members, to ensure that we really fulfill that vision of a sustainable and inclusive city for the future. So thank you all for the opportunity, and thank you, Rick, and looking forward to an exciting adventure.
And we were likewise excited to have you here. So welcome.
Thank you.
And now, if the clerk could call the consent calendar.
All items will be considered and approved in one motion unless removed by a council member for discussion, and you have one request to speak.
And that one request to speak is from Denise Barton. Welcome, Ms. Barton.
Good evening. Let's first look at modifications or changes in cost in the agenda items. Starting with item 3A, which is a modification with no additional change, which is good, but then look at items 3F and 3J. 3F is just starting the price increase upward by its beginning, its first modification, but 3J is moving on up in its place, being on its second modification. Again, showing the low volume of initial contracts. Or do you really think by doing it in bits and pieces like this, no one will notice? Next, I'm finding the new wording in tonight's agenda perplexing. Are departments or divisions now able to give city council are above city council and management, and now have the ability to place requirements or demands? That would seem dangerous, but let's look at the items you've done this with tonight. Starting with item 3J, why would the mobility division be able to set requirements or make demands as a division? Or would this be the new way to direct attention and or blame away from the city council and management? Then at item 3H, one does have to wonder the connection and why the Architectural Services Division would be able to put a requirement on City TV to upgrade the Master Control Equipment project. But why would the Director of Public Works be the only one authorized to make changes, unless, of course, you're trying to make it harder to backtrack the funds harder? See, Rick Hull is really no different than Rod Gould or Lamont Yule before him. Another bright, shining example of this would be item 3M, the new starting salary of the new Assistant City Manager, considering it's being based on Elaine Polachek's salary, who had a very long tenure in the city, and don't especially executives within the city pad do as much extra time as possible their last year to increase their pensions. For these reasons, I think the high set starting salary for the new city's assistant manager needs to be looked at. Thank you.
Thank you, and that concludes the public input. Council members, anybody have any items they wish to pull for this discussion? If not, would anybody care to make a motion?
So moved.
What are we moving exactly?
The consent calendar.
Okay.
Second.
All right. So the approval of the entirety of the consent calendar is moved by Councilmember Vasquez, second by Councilmember O'Day, and can we have a roll call vote, please?
Councilmember Kuhn?
Yes.
Councilmember Vasquez?
Yes.
Councilmember Himmelrich?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Davis?
Yes.
Councilmember O'Day?
Yes.
Councilmember O'Connor?
Yes.
And Mayor Winter.
Yes. So the consent calendar, all the items therein pass unanimously. Could the clerk call the next item on the agenda, please?
The next item is item 4A, options for the removal of excess runway pavement at the Santa Monica Airport, and you have one request to speak.
It looks like we have a staff report. Welcome.
Good evening, Mayor and Council members. Rick Valti, your City Engineer. And tonight I am presenting a summary of the information that's in your staff report for the replacement of runway pavement. So taking a step back, on May 24th council meeting, the City Council directed staff to proceed with the center alignment of the runway shortening project. And at that same council meeting, direction was provided for a distinct and separate project. And that direction was for staff to return to council as soon as possible with options for projects to remove the now unneeded pavement at either end of the runway. So just to provide a quick review of the different pavement components at the airport. The green broken line is a representation of the runway protection zone. The yellow chevrons represents the runway safety area. Obviously, this gray long rectangle represents the new 3,500-foot runway. And then the smaller 6 gray transparent boxes represent your new taxiways. The yellow outlined area is the proposed pavement removal area, and that includes the runway safety area. So just to review, the runway protection zone is the area, it's characterized as the area beyond the runway to enhance the protection of people and property on the ground. While your runway safety area, or known as the RSA, is a surface that's suitable for reducing the risk of damage to airplanes in the event of an overrun. Now focusing a little bit on the runway safety area. The runway safety area must be able to support aircraft rescue and firefighting equipment, and it must have minimal surface variations, so no depressions or ruts. And just to clarify, for the 3 options that we will be presenting tonight, all of the 3 options will include pulverizing and stabilizing the existing pavement within the RSA, and that amounts to about 90,000 square feet of pavement. So now going into the 3 options that staff and consultants have evaluated, we looked at the options of hydroseeding, artificial turf, and pulverizing and stabilizing existing pavement in place. And you see the rough order of magnitude costs of $3.4 million, $5.7 million, and $2.7 million respectively. These rough order of magnitude costs include design, construction, and construction management. So looking at option 1, for hydroseeding, in addition to the RSA, any pavement outside of the runway safety area, we will be removing unused pavement and we will be applying hydroseed. That amounts to about 556,000 square feet. The estimated cost, like I mentioned before, is about $3.4 million. And certain considerations on this option is that there will be as-needed maintenance required. It includes the use of natural materials, and there is no soil import required. This surface treatment is used at the San Bernardino International Airport outside of their runway safety areas. These are just graphics that show you the operation of applying hydroseeding on prepared surfaces. And this is a rendering of what the airport might look like once we have applied the hydroseeding. Now going to option 2, artificial turf. In addition to the pulverized pavement within the RSA, outside the RSA we would remove the unused pavement and install artificial turf. Again, 556,000 square feet. The rough order of magnitude cost is about $5.7 million. And considerations for this option include minimal maintenance, durability of the surface, aesthetics in a way. It does have the highest cost, and construction of this project will require significant truck trips for the import and export of material. Artificial turf has been used at the San Diego International Airport outside of their runway safety area. This graphic just shows you samples of artificial turf material. And that's a rendering of what the airport might look like if the council selected this option. And then moving to option number 3, pulverizing and stabilizing existing pavement in place. Basically for this option, we would pulverize and stabilize all of the unused pavement within the RSA and outside the RSA. The estimated cost is about $2.7 million. And considerations for this option include a relatively higher maintenance cost, aesthetic concerns. It's a lower cost for construction, And this option has no material that needs to be imported or exported. Everything remains in place. This method of surface treatment has been used at the San Jose International Airport outside their runway safety areas. These are graphics that show you the type of equipment that would be used to pulverize the existing pavement and the application of the soil stabilizers. And this is a rough rendering of what your airport would look like if the City Council selected this option. So for the schedule of each of these options, we don't anticipate a significant variation in project duration. Other than construction, there might be a variation of maybe 1 to 2 months between the 3 different options, but everything else in the phases of design procurement, design and construction procurement, it would all be the same. Excuse me. So what are our next steps? Council would provide staff with direction. Staff would prepare a request for proposal for design services, and staff would return to Council towards the end of 2017, early 2018, for award of the design contract and approval of recommended budget actions. And that concludes the presentation, and I'm be more than happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Velte. I have a question. So all 3 options included at some point there would have to be a temporary closure of the new shortened runway, correct?
That's correct.
But for all 3 options, that time period would be essentially the same?
At this time, we're anticipating that the runway closure would be required for work within the runway safety area. And since the runway safety area work is the same for all 3 options, yes, we expect that closure to be the same.
All right, thank you. Councilmember Himmelrich.
So you talk about maintenance costs, and when we hear things about fields, et cetera, they talk about the fact that the artificial turf is no maintenance, and that grass is high. A grass field, for instance, would be high maintenance. I know this isn't a playing field, but when you say some maintenance, how much on the hydro seeding?
We ran some preliminary numbers, and obviously these are very rough numbers. We don't have specific data yet, but we're estimating that for the artificial turf, you might require occasional vacuuming or grooming, and we're anticipating...
Did you say pruning?
Grooming.
Oh, I was going to say, what are you pruning?
No. So we're anticipating perhaps a cost of about $1,000 to $2,000 a month for that. Mm-hmm. For the hydroseed, that would be an as-needed maintenance. So we would anticipate, if the landscaping were to be overgrown, you'd have to do some kind of trimming. If some of that seed does not take root, we might have to reapply some hydroseed over time. So we estimated perhaps an annual cost for that would be in the order of magnitude of $30,000 to $40,000
a year.
A year, so about $3,000 to $4,000 a month. And then for the pulverize and stabilize in place, the concern there would be during heavy rainstorms, there might be rutting. Some of that stabilizer might be washed out, so we may have to come back there annually to reapply the stabilizer, and we're anticipating that cost may be in the order of magnitude of $60,000 to $70,000.
So on the hydro seeding, would that require watering? I mean, you'd be putting in, I assume, a drought-resistant kind of grass or whatever?
That's correct. We would be, once we get into the design phase, we would specify native plants that, would take root in the environment that it's
and wouldn't need additional water.
The idea would be we would apply the hydroseed during the wet season, and then you wouldn't have to if there is
and
such
cross
a thing.
your fingers that there is one, right? Yeah.
And then we would anticipate that you wouldn't have to do periodic watering. But if we weren't able to apply the hydroseed during the wet season, we would have to do periodic watering to help the hydroseed take root.
And with respect to environmental effects of the three different surfaces, has there been any preliminary discussion of that?
I mean, without having done any specific studies, it's well known that any pavement hard material would contribute the most towards the heat island effect.
Yes.
Obviously, the hydroseed, your natural material, will be the least impactful. And we would estimate that the artificial would be somewhere in between those two extremes.
Thank you.
Mr. Cole, you had something to add with your microphone on?
Thank you. Mayor and members of the council, we should go into a little bit more detail on the runway safety area. At present, the runway does not have a runway safety area, and so it will be a significant improvement to the safety both of surrounding neighborhoods and of planes and their passengers taking off and landing at Santa Monica Airport to have a runway safety area. It's about 150 feet wide, and it's approximately 300 feet long, and Rick has mentioned the dimensions and shown it on the map. All three of the options recommend pulverizing and stabilizing, and Rick has outlined the requirements. We still have some due diligence on what exactly the surface might be, and we'll have to take a look at the safety considerations and our compliance with the consent decree. We're not asking for you to make a final decision on any of these tonight, but to send us in this direction. And it is the recommendation of staff that we move forward with pulverizing and stabilizing. But because this is something that is new, there aren't very many airports that demolish and shorten their runways. We want to make sure that we're having the maximum opportunities to safeguard everyone who lives in the surrounding neighborhoods, as well as anyone coming in and going out of Santa Monica Airport. So just a caveat, because we want to make sure that everyone understands and tracks this issue as we move forward.
Thank you. Councilmember Vasquez.
Along those same lines, when you were talking about the AstroTurf at the end as one option, in the event somebody, a jet or an airplane, has an overrun and skids into it and ruins it, is that pilot liable to replace it?
I would have to defer that question.
He's an engineer, not an attorney.
I have to defer that question.
Well, I guess maybe the attorney should be asking this question or answering.
I think it would depend on the circumstances, council member, but we certainly would be looking at all options in such a circumstance, particularly if somebody had overrun the shortened runway.
The reason I mention is it sounds like obviously there's harder escapes that probably are a little bit more durable than the AstroTurf, but the AstroTurf probably looks aesthetically probably a lot more pleasant for the folks. But at the end of the day, if it means that we have these folks constantly doing these overruns or overshooting and then ripping it out, and then we have to replace it every time.
I just want to mention that the overruns, the runway safety area is intended to, in a way, cover the overruns. And the RSA will not be AstroTurf. The RSA will be the pulverized, stabilized material, whatever is consistent with the consent decree. The AstroTurf will be 300 feet from.
Oh, thereafter.
Correct.
Okay. Okay, thanks.
So ideally, the overruns wouldn't make it. Wouldn't make it into the AstroTurf.
Or the hydroseed.
Or the hydroseed.
All right. I see no more questions from the moment. Mr. Balti, thank you very much. We have one member of the public wishing to speak, Zena Josephs. Welcome, Ms. Josephs.
Thank you. I think you received a letter from the Board of Friends of Sunset Park supporting option 1 and speaking, which is the hydroseeding, and speaking for myself, I'd like to read a few comments from an email from Michael Brodsky, who has a background in environmental science. The hydroseeding significantly reduces the urban heat island effects created by asphalt or concrete or paved surfaces and reduces the effects of climate change, thereby cooling nearby surfaces. Turf would be 30 degrees cooler than asphalt and 14 degrees cooler than bare soil in the heat of summer. It also allows better absorption of water into the aquifer and limits stormwater runoff, which in turn reduces the amount of sediments, soot, lead, and other pollutants that would flow into the ocean. And it can assist with stormwater management through the use of bioswales. Turf or native grasses provide improved air quality and remove dust, smoke, and other pollutants. 2,500 square feet of turf absorbs carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and releases enough oxygen for a family of 4. Native grasses allow the earth to absorb CO2, and they recharge nutrients, which will be useful when the airport closes and is transformed into a park. Native grasses seeded and planted in the area will also allow for a small bonus of limited biodiversity, and it will be more aesthetically pleasing compared to pulverized asphalt surface, and it's in keeping with the goals of closing SMO and creating a park on this site. Thank you.
Thank you. And that concludes the public input. Matters before us. Councilmember McEwen.
Well, tonight we set in motion the promised separate second process. We already made our move on shortening the runway. Now we're going to remove the unneeded concrete. We're not being asked to make the final decision tonight or actually let a contractor. I believe we're supposed to give direction to staff as to the options that have been presented. I will be supporting real grass or other native plants for all the reasons that we heard from the public, but also just because it's most in keeping with our vision of a future great park on that site. And I think it'll be a great visual cue as to what the future holds for our airport land. So I move we support the grass option.
That would be the hydro seeding. Okay, so a motion by Councilmember McEwen, second by Mayor Pro Tem Davis, to support option number, whatever it is, the hydro seeding option. Is it option one? Is there any discussion? Yes,
this is a study session, so they're coming back to us with additional options. So wouldn't this be sort of preliminary approval, a preliminary indication that option one is the most desirable or something after a study session? Yeah. Okay. Just wanted to understand.
All right, and the city attorney has backed away from her microphone button, so I guess that makes her more comfortable. So with that clarity that this is sort of an indication of the council's preliminary interest in option number one for the hydro seeding. Oh, I got her back up. Let's get it straight.
I just want to be clear that what we're discussing here is the study session in relation to the excess runway pavement and not future uses.
Yes.
And I don't really think there's any great heartburn with a study session. We brought you and agendized 3 options. If you want to pick between the 3 options, send us in that direction. You're not making any final decision, but that's the direction we will go.
All right. The motion, I think we can just do a voice vote on the idea that our preference, at least for the short term and the time being, is for option number one, the hydro seeding, and direct staff to come back with the next steps to removing the pavement in a manner that's consistent with public safety and the consent decree. Does that sound good? All right, so I think we can do a voice vote on this, can't we not? So all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, well, that concludes item number 4A. Could the clerk call item 4B, please?
Item 4B is strategy for long-term economic sustainability, and you have 7 requests to speak.
Welcome, Mr. Eagle.
Good evening, Mayor. Good evening, Mayor and Council. I'm Andy Eagle, the Director of Housing and Economic Development. Give a second for the slides to come up. Right. So before you is consideration of beginning the process of developing a strategic plan for long-term economic. Tonight, staff is asking Council to consider how changes in technology and global commerce have the potential to impact Santa Monica and to provide direction regarding whether, and if so, how, we should approach strategizing for the city's long-term economic sustainability. It may be helpful to begin tonight's discussion by acknowledging that developing and implementing carefully crafted strategies to support a robust and thriving economy is not something new to Santa Monica. We've enjoyed several decades of sustained economic prosperity, and while some of that is certainly attributable to broader physical, geographic, and socioeconomic factors, certainly a share of it is directly attributable to previous generations of Santa Monica leaders' deliberate actions, such as recognizing the declining role of manufacturing in the local, regional, and global economy, and planning for the reuse of Santa Monica's increasingly obsolete industrial areas for uses that could support knowledge-based jobs. Another example is the city's investment in the creation of the 3rd Street Promenade as an entertainment and shopping district that became a national model for urban regeneration and helped spark the revival of Santa Monica's historic downtown as a premier destination for shopping, dining, and recreation. And just a third example I want to mention is the city's selectively promoting Santa Monica as a travel and tourism destination that draws visitors from around the globe who support the local economy and our cultural, civic, and experiential amenities. As a result of these careful strategies and other factors, Santa Monica's economy has demonstrated persistent strength and resilience over the past few decades, and we have done economically better than pretty much every other community around us. And just one example of that is if you look at how we compare in taxable sales generated relative to the LA County, Southern California, and the state, this is on a per capita basis, we've done 2 or 3 times as well. And the strength of our economy and the related revenues to the city have allowed us to provide a breadth and depth of services that are unheard of in most communities. Previous Santa Monica leaders didn't have a crystal ball to show them exactly what would happen, nor do we. But we do have an opportunity to look at trends, emerging technologies, and technologies that are growing in strength to determine how they might impact Santa Monica and how we might harness those forces to serve our community's best interests. We should also acknowledge that we're not starting from scratch. Many of the city's strategic planning efforts have incorporated evaluations of economic trends, including market-demanded impacts, to provide a basis for goals, governance, and implementation strategies. Examples include the land use and circulation elements of the general plan, specific plans such as the downtown community plan, the strategy for a sustainable local economy, and the creative capital cultural plan. That said, we may be hard-pressed to rely solely on the strategic planning that we've done to date, as change, particularly change driven by the exponential growth in technology, has the potential to undermine many of the strategies that we relied on today. I'd like to touch briefly on some of the things that are happening now or expected to happen and how they might affect us. I'm going to do so briefly because we could spend hours talking about each of these, including considering what might happen, how it might impact us, and whether we can influence its impacts. Should we continue to forward with this process, staff looks forward to having these discussions with you and the community. So let's start with the changing nature of work as a place. If you think back to much of the 20th century, manufacturing was a major force in the U.S. economy. Many workers went to a factory, put in time on a floor, and clocked out at the end of the workday. 3 or 4 decades ago, when we started to transition to a post-industrial, knowledge-based economy, we were still largely reporting to work, talking on a landline, perhaps using a computer for some composition, simple computations. But in both these cases, the factory and a traditional office workspace, we still went to work as a place. Now this is all changing. Think about how many people you know that rarely actually show up at their official workplace. Many knowledge-based workers can complete most of their work using a cell phone, tablet, and laptop. For many, work is no longer a place, and this is expected to grow more dominant, particularly as technology and globalization allows knowledge-based workers to work anywhere and anytime. The changing nature of work as a place could have significant consequences for Santa Monica, particularly because a large portion of Santa Monica's employment is engaged in knowledge-based industries that have the greatest ability to work anywhere, anytime. What if many of our businesses and workers no longer go to a fixed workplace and no longer need a significant physical location? In addition to the potential for empty buildings, there are also significant fiscal consequences for the city. For example, Santa Monica businesses are projected to pay nearly $31 million in business license taxes to the general fund this year, with a business license code that's largely written for 20th century businesses. Our businesses also pay sales taxes on business-to-business sales, and most of our workers frequent our restaurants and shops, paying taxes on most purchases and supporting a range of restaurants and shops that otherwise would not be expected in a community of our size. Many experts contemplate the future of a knowledge-based economy, recognize that people will continue to need human connection, a sense of community, and face-to-face interactions. And one of our opportunities is to think about those needs and how Santa Monica can address them. The changing nature of work also has the potential to affect people's choices about where they live. While many people are drawn to Santa Monica because of its great weather, beautiful beaches, good schools, etc., it's also desirable for its proximity to jobs. If many workers no longer need to commute to work, how will that affect who chooses to live in Santa Monica? Alternatively, could it further increase demand to live in Santa Monica when anyone, irrespective of where their official workplace is located, could choose or desire to live in Santa Monica? I want to move to a second trend that we should be thinking about, and that's the growing importance of internet sales. This will affect Santa Monica. This will affect most cities. Data from the U.S. Department of Commerce shows that in 2016, internet sales accounted for nearly 12% of all retail sales, and that's increased from less than 8% just 4 years earlier. Most economists predict that internet sales will continue to increase market share in the coming years. The impacts of the shift to internet retail sales are already being felt in the global, national, and local economy as an increasing number of traditional brick and mortar retailers face bankruptcy and closure, while other traditional brick and mortar retailers are seeing an increasing share of their retail sales coming from the internet. This has several implications for Santa Monica. First, it has the potential to significantly depress the general fund's largest revenue source, sales taxes. For fiscal year 17-18, the city's 1 percentage point share of sales taxes are budgeted to generate nearly $38 million for the general fund, with an additional more than $8 million supporting general city services from Measure Y transactions and use tax. The Santa Monica Malibu Unified School District is projected to receive more than $16 million of transaction and use taxes associated with Measures Y and GSH, while affordable housing efforts are expected to receive more than $8 million. The shift in internet sales hits local revenues so hard for several reasons that relate to how the law treats internet sales differently from brick and mortar sales. In addition to the fiscal impacts of internet sales, the shift away from brick and mortar sales also creates potential impacts on Santa Monica's downtown and commercial areas. Brick and mortar retailers play an important role in the vitality of downtown and most of our commercial areas. If the retail apocalypse, which is what experts are, some are using to call the decline in-store retail sales, if that happens, the downtown and commercial corridors could lose vitality and pedestrian activity and the associated sense of place. Many observers believe that in order for commercial areas to survive, they'll need to prioritize customer experiences over traditional shopping, with an emphasis on food, beverage, and entertainment. Successful brick-and-mortar retailers will have to provide services, unique experiences, and customer support that can only be attained in person. We've already seen this trend unfolding in Santa Monica. You know, a decade ago, a primary concern was that small local retailers were having a hard time competing with the global brands and big box retailers. Now we're even losing the global brands on our streets. If you think back to 15 years ago when Midnight Special closed on the promenade, and we had few tools to deal with the global booksellers that were taking out our local retailers. 7 or 8 years ago, Borders closes. They're having a hard time competing with this new company called Amazon.com. Now we're seeing that Barnes & Noble is going to close soon, and it seems that every week we hear of another well-known or small retailer that's entering bankruptcy, and experts are saying that the company was able to compete with internet retailing. And we're seeing it even on the 3rd Street Promenade, one of the region's premier retail streets, as we face an unprecedented level of storefront vacancy. In fact, the Downtown Santa Monica Inc. board has created a special committee that's specifically looking at the issue of the changing nature of retail and its relation to the vitality of our downtown. And just what this weird slide is, if you remember the movie Demolition Man from the 1980s, all restaurants had become Taco Bell. So this is over 20 years ago, but thinking of globalization and consolidation. So let's move on to another trend that we think is worth spending some time anticipating and think about how it's going to affect us. And that is the convergence of autonomous vehicles with shared ride services such as Lyft and Uber. Most of us have been following the debate, and we've heard those who think it will be beneficial and those who think it will be detrimental. So those on the detrimental side fear a future where there are more cars on the road and more congestion as people can live even farther from their destinations as commuting time becomes productive time when the vehicle is doing the driving. On the other hand, there are those who see thoughtful planning and policy making leading us toward a greener, more efficient future where road space dedicated to autos can be reduced as automated vehicles require fewer and narrow travel lanes, yet provide much greater efficiency, leaving more road for active modes of transportation and reclamation of road space for other uses. They also see a future where most vehicles are powered by electricity and other means with minimal environmental impacts, and a future where traffic accidents, including automobile collisions with pedestrians and bicyclists, are largely eliminated as the human error is removed from the equation. Irrespective of which future you believe in, there will be implications for Santa Monica and for city government, including the potential for significant impacts on some of the key revenues that fund city services. A future of autonomous shared vehicles means that there will be huge opportunity costs associated with owning your own car, as it may be sitting all day, not going out, picking up paying customers. That is, of course, if you continue to own a car, as many of us are expected to completely forego personal ownership of cars. Many positive things there, but just looking at revenues, sales taxes from auto sales and leasing currently provide about $10 million per year to the general fund. There's also expected to be significant reduction in the need for parking structures and parking lots if cars no longer spend most of the day sitting. While it creates great opportunities to reuse parking for people-oriented uses, it also comes with fiscal costs to the city. As an example, in fiscal year 17-18, the general fund is expected to receive nearly $42 million from parking revenues, with another almost $11 million largely supporting the operations of our beaches and about $1.5 million supporting the operations of the Santa Monica Pier. The general fund is projected to receive an additional almost $11 million from parking taxes on public and private facilities and about $14.5 million from parking citations. We have an opportunity to consider what automation of vehicles will mean for public transportation, with the possibility that it could look very different in the future and that we'll see even further blurring of the lines between public and private transportation. We might also want to spend some time thinking beyond autonomous vehicles, considering the opportunities and challenges associated with emerging transportation technologies that may seem highly skeptical at this point, such as Hyperloop transportation. Now, a fourth element that I want to highlight is the further developments in automation, including the anticipated automation of many jobs, as well as artificial intelligence. It has the potential to significantly affect how we provide local services and who or what provides them. And automation isn't going to only affect the service sector. A range of government jobs are expected to be affected as well. Just using RoboCop as an example, law enforcement is experimenting with robotics as a way to reduce the risk to human life in very dangerous situations. Robotic law enforcement also has the opportunity to combat some of the long-standing concerns in this country about racial profiling in law enforcement, as conceivably a robot could be programmed to not have biases. On the other hand, we're going to have to ask ourselves policy questions such as, can a robot be programmed to show mercy, for example, to an expectant mother racing to the hospital and breaking the speed limit? There'll also be fundamental issues about the diminishing number of middle-class jobs in our nation, both in government and in the private sector. We should be careful about assuming that automation will be a panacea, allowing us to significantly reduce our operating costs to address the fiscal impacts associated with the coming economic changes. While many economists are predicting significant job losses related to automation, an equal number of economists are expecting a shift in jobs, resulting in not necessarily a net decrease in overall number of jobs, but rather seeing shifts to more jobs in science and technology. This will be happening, of course, at the national level, but something that will be important for the city government's workforce and within Santa Monica more broadly. And it's an opportunity for us as a community, including our partners at the College District and the School District, to continue to consider the changing nature of work and how we're preparing those who have yet to enter the workforce, as well as those who may be losing their jobs because of the changes. So we mentioned globalization of digital communication, internet retailing, autonomous shared vehicles, and automation of jobs as four of the obvious areas where cities' long-term economic and fiscal sustainability could be affected. There are likely other changes that have yet to be developed or embraced on a broad scale that create opportunities and challenges for us. We wanted to highlight these that we know of to give you a sense of why we think this effort is of such importance. As we contemplate taking on strategic planning related to Santa Monica's long-term economic sustainability, I wanted to mention what staff is not intending this effort to be. So first, we're not proposing sort of a navel-gazing fundamental consideration of who we are as Santa Monica and where we want to be in 20 or 30 or 40 years. Santa Monica, this council, our community have spent a considerable amount of time in the last decade, in particular updating the land use and circulation elements of the general plan, and we think we need to respect those and respect that broader process. On the other hand, we're also not proposing a traditional fiscal enhancement plan where a city looks at how it can use economic development to provide as much revenue as possible to the city. Rather, we're proposing a consideration of if and how we can harness the continuing changes in technology and globalization to support a local economy that is authentic and reflects our values. I'm not sure any of us on staff know what that looks like or how we're going to get there, particularly given the powerful economic forces that we're confronting, but we think it's worth the effort. By failing to focus on self-determination of our economic future, we risk letting global forces determine it for us, likely without the same regard for what makes Santa Monica special and unique. With that as background, we're seeking council direction on some foundational questions related to the proposed effort, starting with the fundamental question of, first, should we devote time and resources to developing an economic sustainability strategy? As you can see from our staff report, we think this is serious. However, given the considerable amount of council, community, and staff time and resources that would be involved in the effort, we're seeking council direction on whether we should undertake this process. The second question, if council is supportive of moving forward, what might the scope of work involve? We have some ideas for your consideration. For example, we might want to start at the broadest level by considering Santa Monica's competitive advantages and disadvantages relative to the evolving economy. For example, we've got a brand today, certainly, but will that brand continue to serve us in the future? Where might we focus our efforts to ensure a continued strong local economy? The consideration of our competitive advantages and disadvantages could support considerations of, first, how might our local needs shift in the future and how can we support them? Another would be, what are the fiscal and economic impacts associated with the community's future evolution? Also, what changes are needed in the city's processes, policies, regulations, and infrastructure to support desirable upcoming changes? For example, we don't imagine that we're going to get to the level of saying we've got a detailed plan and we need to allocate 100 linear feet of curb space for autonomous shared vehicles, but we may want to develop a strategy of how do we monitor that and how do we move nimbly as the technology changes. And then we also may want to consider what legislative strategies we might pursue at the federal, state, and regional level to support our future vision of Santa Monica's economy. For example, we might want to support legislative efforts that create a level playing field among services and experiences. Our third question is, how does council wish to participate? We could organize this as an effort where staff and consultants prepare reports, consider options, and return to council with recommendations for approval at key stages. An alternative approach would be to integrate council into the entire process, perhaps with subcommittees that address different elements of the strategy and report back to the broader council. Given the stakes, staff's preference is to integrate the council as much as you're willing to be integrated. We're also seeking your guidance on how best to engage our community to participate in the formation of the strategy. We believe that broad community engagement among residents, businesses, and local stakeholders with a variety of ways to participate would significantly enhance the strategy and its implementation. We anticipate that the opportunities and challenges associated with changes in technology and the economy will not be faced solely by the city. The college district, school district, business districts, nonprofits, and other local organizations will also be impacted. We're seeking council's direction and feedback on engaging our partners in this effort. We anticipate that preparing studies and engaging community members and organizations will require staff time and financial resources. We're seeking council's direction on your willingness to consider resource trade-offs in order to support the effort. And then our last question, if council is supportive, how should we begin this process? One idea is to engage experts to help us consider Santa Monica's competitive advantages and disadvantages relative to the future economy, while at the same time beginning to dialogue with the community and our partners about our effort and their interest in participating. We could also begin to consult with and host dialogues with experts in technology, global economics, and societal dynamics, who can help us think about the future and how it might influence the region and Santa Monica and our place in the region. So I want to conclude the presentation with the 7 questions for which we're seeking council direction, and staff from the City Manager's Office, Finance, and Housing and Economic Development are available to respond to any of your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Agel. Council, anybody have any specific questions from Mr. Agel at this point, or should we commence with the public input? Seeing no one in the queue, we will hear from the public first. The speakers could line up against the wall over there and be ready to speak once they've called your name. I appreciate it. We'll start with Jerry Rubin, followed by Diane Forte, Denise Barton, Carl Hansen, and Kathleen Rawson. Welcome, Mr. Rubin.
Well, thank you very, very much, Mayor Winter, City Council, City staff, fellow Santa Monicans. Well, I must say it was a pretty interesting, futuristic report, but very important to think like that. I kind of have faith in us human beings. I don't think we're ever going to see, in my lifetime, robocops replacing our good police officers and firefighters. I don't think we're going to ever have robo-council members. People are going to be needed to learn how to work together even more. And that's going to be really important. I don't know virtually much at all about economics. And I saw the quote up there from Yogi Berra that said it's difficult to make predictions, especially about the future. But we have to look at these trends. And I think it's a good sign that we have great city staff. And we have to put the faith in people that are going to want to and know how to keep our AAA bond rating and be flexible enough to make these adjustments. I think the private sector is going to be willing to pitch in, but I'm not the kind of guy that goes around saying we need to get government off our back. I think we need government a lot. Of course, we need to streamline things, but government is us. The people are the government. So if we're trying to get government off our back, we're actually slapping ourselves in the face. So I had sent you an email earlier. It was kind of ludicrous. I said we should plant a money tree. But I just learned now that that natural technology is still not available. So,
thank you, Mr. Rubin.
Thank you very, very much.
Next is Diane Forte.
Hi, good evening. I'm Diane Forte, Government Relations, Southern California Edison, and I'm not a robot, so happy to be here tonight. Essentially, what I wanted to say is for a long-term economic stability, Southern California Edison looks forward to continue to partner with the city on transportation electrification. The electric job booms is on, and Santa Monica is leading the way. LAEDC has a whole new category for this. It's called Advanced Transportation Technology, and they estimate about 100,000 jobs are in this sector in Southern California and Santa Monica, Silicon Beach. So in order to implement transportation electrification and clean energy, we need to improve the grid and modernize the grid. Earlier today, Stephanie Vanagas asked me about our rate case. Essentially, we go every 3 years and say what we're going to implement. And I emailed Stephanie and Ricole, so if you need some more information, that is there. But I also gave my cards if you had some questions. So there will be a small percentage increase over the next 3 years. We average about 3% a year, but that's not more revenue to Edison. Our revenue has been flat since 2014. That reflects increased costs so that we can modernize the grid and implement initiatives like transportation electrification. So I just want to say I'd be a resource if you have any questions, and I look forward to continuing partnering with the city on all these great initiatives. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Forte. Next is Denise Barton. Oh, I'm sorry, Kevin, I didn't see that. Councilmember McEwen has a question.
Ms. Forte, I'm glad to see you here tonight. It's kind of fortuitous because that inquiry you got from Stephanie Venegas,
Yes.
that was me.
Oh, okay, great.
And the reason I asked is because energy costs are going to have a tremendous impact on not only our local but our regional economy. And I just got a letter from the Laborers International Union of North America asking me as a council member to take a stand on energy rate increases proposed by Southern California Edison. I read the answer you gave, Stephanie, and frankly
Yes.
found it more confusing than the original statement.
Oh, that was my
the
clone
union-
that did that one. No,
The union is saying that you're going to the CPUC asking for a 12% energy rate increase. You just said 3% over 3 years. The statement I got back through Stephanie Venegas, the council office, was an average of 3.1% over the next 10 years, which compounds out to an increase of about 39% in energy costs, which could be devastating.
No,
So can you
the statement
clarify-
was our trend over the past 10 years has been 3% per year, which is reflects inflation.
You could do some work on the clarity of the statements,
Okay,
because frankly, it was an awful lot of words that seemed designed to fend off the fundamental question, which is how much are you asking if the rates go up in the future? Can you give me a simple
Sure.
declarative sentence that explains that?
In 2018, the rate is 2.5%. In 2019, 3.8%, and in 2020, 5.1%. The average bill would be increased $3.56 in 2018, $5 in 2019, and $7 in 2020. And for low-income customers, it'd be $241, $341, and $481 per month. We also have 2 energy credits of $60 a year.
So since the average bill, I believe, is something on the order of $91,
Correct.
then that increase of about, and I was adding them in my head as you read them off, of about $15 would represent roughly the 12% rate increase that the union contacted me about. So Southern California Edison is proposing to the CPUC over the next 3 years to increase energy costs by 12%. Compounded.
It averages 3% per year. I don't know if you could add percentages like that, but
Well, they compound. It wasn't 3. You said it was 3% 1 year and 5%
yeah,
another year.
I'm just,
Yeah.
it's 2.5% in 2018.
So the union is at
3.8%
least
is like-
close to the number. So this is a significant increase over the next 3 years. And you're saying that that is not additional profit to SCE. That
Correct.
reflects the ongoing costs of your either providing electricity or perhaps in the future just providing transmission as the region goes.
So it's
to
transmission, it's upgrades to the system, poles, wires, grid modernization to allow for transportation electrification, for clean energy. Infrastructure has to be upgraded.
I'm just trying to get an accurate quantification of the
Sure.
increase because that's going to affect our planning for our local economy. So
Sure.
I think I have a closer idea now than I did from the statement I got through Stephanie. So thank you.
Sure,
Thank you for
I'm
being
happy
here.
to answer any more questions. Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Forte. We'll now hear from Denise Barton.
Good evening. How interesting that you're focusing on what you're unable to control in this study session. Your focus is completely on world trends and economy. That continues to make advancements, which is one point to be considered, although the staff report was quite extreme. But here, why do we not look at the real reason for our city to soon be in debt, which is the same reason as back on January 21st, 2013, as well as recently mentioned in the May 23rd, 2017 financial status update, which is the cost of city employees, their benefits and pensions. But then with the amount of new executive employees and new departments our new city manager needs, one does have to wonder. In addition, with Elaine Polachek's long tenure with the city, one might question the starting salary of the new assistant city manager. So with that alone, one might seriously question your commitment to the city's financial stability. But then, of course, if you go further in the article by Ashley Archibald on January 21st, 2013, under the heading of Feeling of Loss, there is mention of $12.5 million in grant funding which the city had to return, due to the grant funding for the Mountain View Trailer Park being used in ways other than the grant specified it was to be used for. So the city slipped the money under Jerry Brown's door, hoping no one would notice. Who do you ask was responsible for using the grant funds in ways other than they were specified for? Why, Barbara Collins from the Housing Authority, of course. And another questionable expense of the Housing Authority's investigation protocol. So, as far as I'm concerned, I've been under surveillance by the Housing Authority since October 24, 2017. And since the Housing Authority continuously cries poor mouth to the amount of $500,000 to $1 million per year, then why would affordable housing tenants like me be under constant attack by the Housing Authority at the expense of the non-resident taxpayers? Don't these points matter to the economic stability of the city? Thank you.
Mr. Hanson?
Good evening, Mayor and Council members. Welcome to Mr. Gupta. I'm Carl Hansen, Director of Government Affairs for the Santa Monica Chamber of Commerce. The Chamber submitted a letter to you today. We strongly support the city pursuing a long-term economic sustainability plan and wanted to make a few comments on the scope of that. First, while it may be difficult to predict some aspects of our future economy, the needed changes to city processes, policies, regulations, and infrastructure referenced in Part 2C of the discussion session may be easier to identify now. We know the Chamber, the BIDS, Santa Monica Travel and Tourism, and other such organizations would be very excited to be part of that conversation. I think part of what helped Santa Monica weather the Great Recession so well is the diverse mix of industries that call Santa Monica home. Aside from the obvious concern of regional hospitality, we'd love to see a broad outreach to other industries in the community that have concerns about the future. I had a look over the top 100 employers in the city today, and just looking at education, entertainment, technology. I think technology